Hello, security pros, and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on today's ESA webinar, PIAM, Physical Access Control on Steroids. During this webinar, Right Crowd experts will explore the tangible benefits of adopting a PIAM solution. Imagine managing access for thousands of employees effortlessly, accommodating their changing roles and travel patterns with precision and ease. No more manual errors, no more cumbersome approval processes, just seamless automation that enhances security and efficiency alike. I'm Hannah Boone, ESA's Marketing and Communications Director, and I'm excited to lead this webinar here today. Before we dive in, I'd like to provide some tips for those of you joining us on your first ESA webinar. First of all, welcome, and you will be muted for the duration of this webinar, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. If a question or comment comes to mind at any point during today's session, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll ensure to save some time for your questions with our experts here today. We'll also be recording this webinar so that you can rewatch the on-demand session and share it with your colleagues. So tomorrow you'll receive an email thanking you for your attendance today, along with a link to the recording. Also, calling all security pros who are ready to take their career to new heights. Don't miss out on the opportunity to join us at ESX 2024, taking place June 3rd through the 6th in Louisville, Kentucky. It is the premier event for electronic security and life safety professionals. With engaging sessions, valuable networking opportunities, and cutting-edge technology exhibits, ESX promises to be an unforgettable experience. But hurry, early bird rates are ending soon, so register before April 20th to secure your spot at a discounted rate. You can visit esxweb.com/register today and invest in your business. We at ESA realize that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending that time here with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bart, Chief Product Officer at Right Crowd.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and welcome everyone to this webinar about PIAM. Short introduction from my perspective. So my name is Bart van Zevenand. I'm the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Right Crowd. I spent most of my career in cybersecurity. I was mostly focused on what is today known as managed security services, the remote monitoring and management of security infrastructures like firewalls, intrusion detection, antivirus, and the like. And I was also involved in a lot of data breach investigations from that perspective. And then in 2015, I made the switch from logical or cybersecurity to physical security when I co-founded a company active in security wearables. And that company then got acquired by Right Crowd in 2019. So I've been part of the Right Crowd team ever since. So what I want to do in this webinar is go into a bit more detail on PIAM, what it is, why it is relevant, etc. Now, before we dive into PIAM itself, we need to talk a little bit about physical access control in general. So briefly, from an agenda perspective, that's where we'll start, physical access control systems, and more specifically, the big challenges that we see every single day in the field with physical access control systems. And that'll be the foundation to then make the switch to physical identity and access management, or PIAM. And we'll talk about what it is, like what is it, why is it relevant? After that, we'll go into a number of use cases. There's many use cases for PIAM, but we'll pick the most common ones and zoom in on those. And then we'll take a look at a return on investment example, showing like what is the actual return when you make an investment in PIAM versus not doing so. And then I'll spend a couple of minutes giving you a very short demonstration of what PIAM looks like, not so much from a security administrative perspective, but as an end user. If you're just an end user that goes to the office every single day, you have a badge to get into the building, how can you sort of interact with the physical security team through PIAM? And then we'll wrap up and we'll open it up for Q&A, and any question can be asked as part of that session. So let's dive into physical access control systems. Pretty much any large enterprise today uses some form of a physical access control system. And some of you may use the well-known brands in the market. You have companies like Lenel, you have Honeywell with systems like EBI, ProWatch, you have companies like Genetec, Johnson Controls with their secure system. So there's many physical access control systems out there. And if we look at the main goal of a physical access control system, it's super straightforward. It is making sure that only the right people can get into your facilities. So the physical access control system contains a list of people, contains access levels, contains credentials. That's like the main ingredients. And then it'll say like this person is allowed to go through these and these doors or these and these areas. So very handy to control who can get into sort of your premises. Now, what is wrong? Like that seems to be pretty straightforward. So what are the challenges that we're seeing with physical access control system? There's quite a few. And the first sort of root cause why we are seeing physical access control systems is that physical access control systems typically are implemented as isolated systems, not connected to anything else. And in a lot of cases, that is complemented with manual processes. So in a lot of cases, we see literally a physical access control system with a number of administrators that have access to it, and they manually enter names or import them from an Excel sheet, and then they're going to assign access levels to those people in a manual way. That's still what we see a lot out there. At best, there is some integration that is being done with what you could call the source of truth for identities, which in a lot of organizations, when they do make that connection, they pick Active Directory as sort of that system. So they pull information from Active Directory into the system, but still from there onwards, it's like a manual process to then sort of assign names, access levels, credentials to each other. So that's one sort of bucket of challenges, and I'll get back to specifically why that is problematic. The second thing we see is that physical access control systems are typically used in a very static way. And what do we mean by that? We assign access to a person once, like typically when they join the organization, and then that access remains the same throughout sort of the life cycle of that individual. And that is in contradiction or contrast with the reality of today's large organizations. After the pandemic, a lot of organizations switched to hybrid working. They reduced the number of buildings they had or the space they had within those buildings. And so in a lot of cases, you want to be able to say, not everyone needs to go into the building every single day. So the access needs, the requirements to get into a building change. Do I need my badge to work like every single day into all of the buildings that I potentially get into? Probably not. It should only work and I should be able to get into the buildings that I need to go into on the days I need. And that's a very simple example. There's also more fundamental sort of reasons to say we need to move away from static access to dynamic access. Think of safety requirements. Think of training and certification requirement. Like for someone to enter the data center, as an example, we would want that person to have gone through a training, for example, on ISO 27001 training. If you have that training, fine, you can get in. But that is sort of a variable, an attribute. You either have that or you don't. And that attribute can change, like your training may be valid for a year. So after that expired, your access should be removed. And that, of course, is very hard to do if you have a static physical access control system where you manually put things into. And so if we translate that into a real life scenario, I've picked an example from one of our customers. This is a healthcare organization. They have, and I rounded the numbers to be clear, they have about 25,000 employees. And if you look at some of the changes that happened in 2023 for this organization, so just in a 1-year period, there were about 2,000 people that left the organization in that 1 year. They backfilled and hired new people, roughly 2,500. They had about 800 people that had changed to their people record in the physical access control system. That was either a change in their role, and that has, of course, an implication on the physical access, or a location, people that moved to another part of the country. And then they did sell off a branch that disappeared from the organization. At the same time, they also did an acquisition of a small IT-related organization that became part of the IT arm of the company. So if you just look at this example of this one healthcare organization, just look at the total number of changes that happened And that should have happened to their physical access control system as well. So you would expect that in the physical access control system, all of these record changes were done correctly on the right day, that the access levels were updated in sync with that. And so try to do that in a manual way. So try to do that in a standalone physical access control system. You can imagine that things will go wrong. And so very quickly, this becomes what we like to refer to as access chaos. And access chaos is a real and a serious problem. Because go back to the fundamentals of a physical access control system, which we started with, like you want to control and make sure that only the right people get into your buildings. Access chaos basically defeats that purpose. Access chaos means that there's going to be people in your access control system that no longer should be there. There's going to be people in your access control system that have too much access accumulation as it's known. And so the more time passes, the more you see the quality of data in the physical access control system deteriorate. And after a 5 or 10-year period, you can literally say that the physical access control system has become worthless when it comes down to what it does. It's still like a fully functional system when you look at it from an IT angle, but from an actual risk perspective, a control perspective, it has really deteriorated in quality. And that's, in summary, the challenges we see with physical access control systems and what lead us into the sort of definition or concept of a physical identity and access management system. And before I go into explaining what exactly PIAM is, I want to make a sort of side step to the logical or cybersecurity space. And I mentioned in the introduction that that is what my background is. I spent over 20 years in cybersecurity. And if you look at what happened from an access control perspective in cybersecurity, you've seen a significant change around the year 2000. In the 80s and 90s, if you look at how we sort of manage the access to applications, to IT systems, we did it in a way that is very similar to what I just explained with physical access control systems. It was done in a fairly static way. And what literally happened is that when an IT developer developed an application, part of their development was user management. So within the application itself, they would maintain and manage the users and assign access. What can this user do within this application? And of course, you can imagine if you have 100 different applications that you use across your enterprise, that the management of people within each of these applications and the access they have within each of these applications becomes really chaotic. And that was the start of what in the sort of early 2000s became identity and access management in logical security. And so what happened is that organizations started to basically pull the whole user and access management out of the individual applications, and they put a smart layer on top of their applications, and they started to manage users and access rights within that layer, and that layer then integrated with all of the individual applications. And that's what we still know today as identity and access management. And that is pretty much what PIAM also does, but then in the physical access control space. So if we look at what it really is, PIM, Physical Identity and Access Management, it is a smart software layer that you put on top of your physical access control system. So it has like a two-way integration with the physical access control system. And in turn, that layer, the PIM layer, then integrates with all sorts of IT and business systems on top of it. Which ones? Any system that is relevant to make good and sound decisions on who should be able to access what within your facilities. And you see a couple of examples on the left. An HR system is for sure a very relevant piece of information. Why is that? You want to know, when do we have new people that on board? What is their start date? When do people change roles? When do people offboard the organization? The source of truth for all of that information is the HR system. So being able to pull information from an HR system and then use that information as an attribute to then decide and push it down into the physical access control system is one of the things that a PIM solution will do. Let's take another example. learning management systems or training systems. Those systems are relevant for physical security access decisions. In a lot of industries, you have strict compliance regulations that say for someone to be able to enter a certain work site, or for people to enter a certain manufacturing facility, or to enter a mining site, or to enter a data center, I have a number of prerequisites. I have mandatory things that need to be met. And that can range, that can be medical checks or medical conditions that need to be validated. That can be trainings that you need to go through. That can be an induction video that you should have watched. That can be certain certifications you hold, all things that are relevant. And same thing again, what a PIM system will do is it will connect up with those systems, pull that information in. And what you then generate is a big engine, this PIM engine, that does two things. First of all, it is going to automate a lot of the processes in physical access control. And then secondly, it's going to turn physical access control from something that is extremely static to something that is dynamic. And the sort of technical term that we like to use for this is attribute-based access control. So instead of statically saying John has access to the data center, what we're going to do is we're going to say people that have the following attributes, they have a certain role, for example, they're part of the IT organization. They have another attribute can be the location. They are based in these 4 states in the US. And another attribute, they've gone through these and these trainings. A physical identity and access management system is going to be able to say, these are the conditions, the attributes that I expect. If those are met, then that person has that access. And the beauty of this is that if one of those attributes changes, automatically, we will make sure that the appropriate change is made in the physical access control system. So that may mean that when the training to get into the data center expires, first of all, we're proactively gonna warn this person and say, hey, be careful. Your sort of training is gonna expire in 2 weeks from now. But if that person does not take any action, they don't go through sort of the training or renew that training, then the access is automatically going to be revoked for that person until that attribute has been updated. And in this case, the training has been sort of redone or recertified. So in a nutshell, PIM is that smart software layer that sits on top of the physical access control system, unlocks it, connects it up with the rest of your IT and business systems, the systems that are relevant, and then automates all of your access control processes and makes it dynamic thanks to that attribute-based access control functionality. So that's a quick overview. Let's now dig into a couple of very specific examples, and there's many. There's like probably 20, 25 use cases for PIM that we've seen across our customer base and across also the customer base of other PIM vendors. But I want to focus on just 4 of them, which are the most common ones that we see out in the field. The first one is what you could call the absolute basics of physical access control. At some point, someone joins the organization, they will need either a physical badge or a mobile credential to be able to get into the right sort of buildings or floors into a building that you manage. And so if we compare what happens if you just have a physical access control system, but not a PIM system, what you see is that in reality, you kick in a lot of manual processes. You often see manual requests, and it can be the form of an email or an online form that is being filled out that says like, hey, we have John starting next Monday. He's part of the sales organization and he's based in Rochester, so he needs access to the building down there. An email is sent or that form is filled out. Someone in the physical security team picks that up. And then a whole process starts like, oh, we need to make sure a badge is provisioned, is printed out, that we add sort of John to the physical access control system, add a record, add the access levels to that based on something that can be a description in the email, that can be a policy that says if you're in sales, then you need to have these accesses. And all of that is being done in a highly manual way. The same is true, and probably even more important, for offboarding. The biggest risk from an insider perspective, and we all know that insider risk is a very, very important risk that organizations face. The biggest insider risk is linked to offboarding. People that are being let go from an organization are leaving the organization themselves. And that's typically a time when a lot of sensitive information is at risk, because that's the time when they tend to sort of try to take copies of access information, certain information, etc. And physical access plays a role in that. If I'm able to get into a certain part of the building where I can take a picture or download information or whatever it may be, that is extremely relevant. Without a PIM solution, that offboarding, again, is going to depend on a lot of manual processes. It's going to depend on typically the HR department to say, hey, physical security team, this person has been let go. Can you please remove the physical access for that person? Anything that is a manual process, and we all know this, will fail at some point. It will very often be executed just fine and in time, but even if it's just 1% or 2%, if we go back to our healthcare service provider example earlier on, if you have thousands of changes that you manage on an annual basis, 1 or 2% can go wrong or be missed or be too late. That 1 or 2% does expose your organization. And so if we compare this scenario with a company that has implemented the PIM solution, this picture looks completely different. What happens is that the PIM will integrate with the source of truth for, in this case, new employees joining or people that are leaving the organization, so typically the HR system. And as soon as a new person starts in the organization, the HR system is being updated, new record is going to be provisioned. It's going to say this is the start date of that person. And with PIM, we are automatically going to pick that information up based on a rule set. It's going to say, oh, this is a new person. Here's the start date. Here's the role the person in. What I'm going to do now is, and this is all fully automated, it's going to create a new record in the physical access control system for that person. It's going to kick off a workflow to make sure that a badge gets provisioned and printed by the starting date of that person. It's going to look based on things like role and location. What is the default access that we should link to that access badge for that person? And so by the time this person comes into the office for the first day, their badge is there and everything will work flawlessly. Same is true for the offboarding. And as we said, probably even more critical. If in the HR system, you end the contractual relationship with the employee, it will automatically move down into the PIM, and the PIM will immediately revoke any access that that person had to any of your locations. And the beauty of PIM is that everything that happens, every change is being logged, and you have a full audit trail of that. So if you have an audit as part of, for example, an ISO 27001 certification, you can literally show the auditor exactly everything that happened throughout the life cycle of that individual that is part of the investigation of that audit. So that's one use case. Let's go to a next one, access requests. As part of the onboarding, what typically happens is that you're going to provision default access for people. If I'm based in Belgium, as an example, my badge will provide me with access to the Belgian office that we have. But by default, my badge will not work in our Seattle office. And rightfully so, like based on good security practices that should not be needed. But imagine that I'm going to travel to Seattle 2 weeks from now, and I would like my badge to work in that office for a week because I'm going to spend some time, about a week there for meetings. What happens without a PIM solution is that either I'm just going to show up and then try to get my badge to work when I get there, or there may be some sort of a process whereby I send an email or fill out a form, and that email or that form is going to be sent around, and then people are going to say, hey, is this okay for Bart's badge to work in the Seattle office for that week? And it's a painful manual process, let alone the audit related information. How do you track all of those changes and requests? Fast forward, PIM. So imagine this same organization has put PIM in place. What changes is that a PIAM solution typically comes with a self-service interface where me being an employee, I simply on the internal network, on the internet, I go to my browser, I log on to a portal using single sign-on, and I can simply say, hey, traveling from that date till that date to that office, I would like my badge to work, submit. Behind the scenes, as the security team, you're going to be in full control of what happens next. You can have either a number of automated rules that are going to decide based on who I am, where I'm located, what access I request, where you're going to automatically sort of approve it. Or you can say, no, I would like a workflow to be kicked in. I want first Bart's manager to approve this request. And then I want the area manager in Seattle to review it and approve it as well. And if all of that went well, then the access will be enabled by the time that I get to the Seattle office. Same thing as I mentioned earlier on, full audit trail. You will know exactly who requested a change at what time, on what day. You will see who reviewed that request. When did they approve it? Or if they did not approve it, what comments did they add to the note for not approving it? So full audit trail again as part of a PIM solution. Let's move to the next topic, another interesting use case that is part of most of the PIM solutions on the market today, visitor management. And you may think like, visitor management, why is that part of PIM? I do have my own visitor management solution. And that's an interesting one. What we see in the market today that a lot of organizations either don't have any system yet. So yes, we still see manual logbooks where you enter and you write down your name and you get like a sticky badge to put onto your shirt. But more and more organizations have started to adopt electronic visitor management systems. Interesting thing is that those systems are again a standalone system. It is not linked to anything else. It is not linked to the physical access control system. So if I want that visitor to be able to get through certain doors into certain parts of the building, I'm not able to control that. The only thing I can hope for is that the host with whom the visitor will go into the building will open the right doors and will not go into places where that visitor should not go. If we compare that again with a PIM solution, from a physical identity and access management perspective, think of the following. Why would you treat a visitor any different from a system perspective than your employees? Or if we look a little broader, whether it's an employee, a contractor, a vendor, a visitor, anyone that enters your facilities, your premises, wouldn't you want all of those to be managed in a single system so that you know exactly who got into your facilities, when, why, and so on? And that's what a PIM solution does. It does have a visitor management module as well. It will do all of the things you expect from a visitor management solution. So you have a reception sort of interface where you can enter visitors manually when they arrive. You can have what we call visitor pre-registration. So if I'm working in an organization, I want to invite a visitor, I can log on, I can pre-register that visitor. That will automatically kick off an email to that visitor with a confirmation, maybe a QR code for the time that they arrive. And the beauty of a PIM is that it is integrated with other systems, including the physical access control system. So if you want to, for example, make sure that this person is not on some form of a watch list, or you want to make sure that that visitor gets an actual badge when they arrive, and a badge that actually has physical access control linked to it that allows them to open doors to certain places, but not other places, all of that, again, is part of the PIM solution. So we see a lot of advantages of treating visitor management as part integrated with your physical access control and PIM, and not handle it through a separate system. A last advantage that often is ignored of having visitor management embedded with everything else is evacuation management. And of course, we all hope that it never happens. But if a disaster happens and you need to evacuate the building, a lot of organizations have inconsistent policies because they have this like pre-trained an orchestrated sort of set of procedures for the employees, like they have lists of employees and they're going to check them off at a mustering point outside of the building. But what about your visitors? Who was in the building? Who registered? Are those visitors safe? Do we know whether they were still with their host at the time, yes or no? Again, with a PIM solution, everything is being put together into a single system. A lot of those PIM solutions, and this is not one of the use cases I'm covering here, but I told you there's 20 or 25. One of them is evacuation management and automating all of those processes around it. Let's dig into a last one from a PIM perspective use case that we often see, and that one is related to health and safety. And this is a bit of a special one for us at RightCrowd. RightCrowd historically started out of the mining industry. Our first customers, the company was founded in Australia, a lot of mining companies in Australia. And if you look at what is the number one sort of priority of any mining company in the world, it is safety. Safety is the number one objective. They want people that go into the mining site every single day to return safely home that same day. So everything is about safety. And so the beauty of a PIM solution in the context of a mining company, but it also applies to other industries to be clear, is that you can actually use your physical access control system as an enforcement layer to make sure that health and safety policies are being respected and taken care of. And let's go through a couple of examples. And let's take the mining vertical as that was the example I started with. What is important in mining environments is that people have gone through the right level of trainings. What is important in that same industry is the amount of hours that people have worked. They do not want people to work, for example, for 80 hours during 1 week. It just creates fatigue, and fatigue in turn creates safety risks. So all of these things need to be monitored: medical checks, random tests, random drug and alcohol tests, how many hours people have worked, as I explained, trainings, induction videos, safety videos they went through. So all of these policies, health and safety related, are defined in these organizations. And so the beauty of a PIM solution in combination with a physical access control system is that you can now link everything together. You may have a system that keeps track of the health, sort of medical sort of situation of a certain person. You can have a system that keeps track of all of the safety and induction videos that people have followed. You may have another system where you do the time tracking. You know how much time people have spent on site in a given week, in a given month. The PIM solution will pull all of that together, and then through that rules and workflow engine, we can basically start to enforce all of those things. So if someone tries to enter that mining site, and we can see based on the information we pulled from the time and attendance information that the person already worked too many hours that week, we first of all can proactively modify the person. Don't come to the mining site because you already worked too many hours. And if they still would show up, the badge won't work because your policy is hard enforced by the physical access control system, thanks to the PIM software that sits on top of it. So that was a number of examples. There's many, many more. You have things like organizations that work with a lot of contractors. You can have thousands of contractors that come to your site every single day. We often see things that from a security perspective are really, really not good, where they use like blank cards for contractors. They hand them out to contracting companies. You have no idea who actually sort of enters the site. There's no audit trails whatsoever. With a PIM solution, you have self-service interfaces where you push it out to the contracting companies. You let them manage their employees, but you are still in control. You can still ensure all of the policies are enforced. You can add workflows on top of that so that you still have the last final sort of check that you can give before an actual contractor can get on site. So plenty more. Enough said. Let's have a look at an example for one of our customers of what the actual sort of financial return is if you invest in a PIM solution. And of course, as you know, any return on investment calculation can trigger a long debate and discussion, like which numbers did you use, how did you calculate it, etc. But we are very transparent with our customers. We're happy to share like how we make those calculations. And so in this example, this is a company with 37,500 employees. They have a personnel turnover of 29%, which is, you may think high, but the actual average across all of industries is actually higher than that. And in this case, we asked the customer, like, what is the average amount that you spend when a new employee starts, to make sure that the physical access control is taken care of? So that includes putting them into the physical access control system, assigning the right access, ensuring that a badge is being requested, provisioning the badge, signing off when the badge is handed out, etc. So 20 minutes on average. Same for offboarding, was also approximately 20 minutes, also with the number of checks that this organization did. Then we looked at changes, like what happens if you need to make a change in the physical access control system. How much time is spent on that? Writing that initial email or filling out that form, someone looking at it and logging into the system to make the change. 5 minutes on average, not too much. And then for this calculation, we took an hourly rate cost of $47 per hour. And if you then start like adding these all up, like what is the total amount of changes? What is the total time spent? What is the hourly rate? You come to an annual cost of, in this example, $412,000. If you then look at, for this type of environment and looking for this customer, like all of the sort of modules or things that they wanted to do with the PIM, the cost came down to approximately 300K on an annual basis. So in their specific example, this came down to an annual saving of over $100,000. And what I really want to stress is that this is like an attractive picture from a return on investment perspective, but it's only a fraction of the actual value that you get out of this from an organizational perspective, because this just represents the operational cost savings. This number does not represent the actual improvements in the quality of the data in the physical access control system, the improvement in the speed at which transactions related to physical access control are handled, the audit readiness of the organization, the ability to literally say, here's all of the sort of proof, Mr. Auditor, of how we sort of approved this access, how this change was reviewed, etc. And all in all, in summary, the risk reduction, the fact that you are much more in control, that your data is accurate, that the access is correct, that only the right people can get to the right place, that is worth probably much more than just the annual cost savings that we're looking at here. So we went through a lot of those use cases. What I want to do now is just have a quick sneak at what such a PIM solution looks like. And just before I dive into the short demo, know that PIM solutions have like two sort of interfaces. There's like the more complex type interface that is used by the security administrator, so people that are in charge of physical security or are leading health and safety teams. And then there's typically an interface towards the actual end user, just the average employee that comes to work every single day and that may want to request additional access or may want to invite a visitor to the organization, etc. So let me switch to my browser. And so what you're looking at here is the example of what I would be looking at as an end user. And of course, this is our internal sort of demonstration environment. I'm not logged into an actual customer environment. But if I'm just an employee, I can, through a URL, just get to this PIM sort of view. And what I can see, in this case, I'm a manager in the organization. I can see that I have a number of tasks. Things that I have to approve. For example, one of my team members that wants to access to a different location. I get my overview of everything that is to be done, a specific set of tasks that I need to look at, but I can also request additional access. So I can see these are all accesses that have been requested either by myself or people on my team. I can simply click, I want to ask or request additional access. I can say, and I'll look up my own name. I can request access for, let's put demonstration. And I can say I would like to have access to, let's say, the Dallas operating center. And I can simply submit this. And this is a simplified sort of version. We can configure this in sort of many different ways. In a real life environment, you would want to have a start date, an expiration date, and the like. But it's just for quick demonstration purposes. You can see my request has now been added. It's pending, and will go to to a workflow where it then is being reviewed first by my manager and then an area manager. As an employee in the company, I can also invite visitors. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I can say I would like to invite a visitor, a start date and the time, when will the visit sort of end, which location do I want to visit, do I invite a visitor to, who is the host for the visit, because then I can also do this on behalf of someone else, what type of visit, in this case, 2 types, escorted, unescorted visit, a reason for the visitor, then the visitors themselves, maybe they already came before, you're able to search them, or it's a new visitor that I want to add. And then, given that we are integrated with the physical access control system, I can also add access levels to all of that. And I did talk about attributes while I explained PIM. So this is an example of, in this case, for the record of this user, I can see that person went through a sensitive data training, a site safety. So the person has actually a view on what are all of the competencies, as we call it, that I have, which ones are about to expire. If that would be the case, I would be reminded of that through a notification, which you see at the top corner here. So this is a very intuitive type interface, and the advantage for the organization is twofold. For the security and safety team, this is a much sort of easier way, because you don't have to type things in yourself, you don't have to go through sort of manual processes, but you're still in control because you run the policies, you still approve some of these requests here. And for the end user, it's just a much better experience. Like, as an end user, this is intuitive, this is simple, I can see where my request is. So that's a short, quick demo of what a PIM looks like from an end user perspective. So in conclusion, we went through PIM, why it is relevant, how it reinforces, gets you much more out of your physical access control system. And it really comes down to these 4 big sort of areas. It is a reduction of your operational costs because it's automating a lot of your physical access related processes. It enforces your security policy. So really leverage the fact that you invested in physical security to use that physical security, physical access control, to enforce all sorts of policies, whether they're security related, safety related, compliance related, doesn't matter. You can also use PIM to enforce safety, not necessarily relevant for all verticals, but a lot of industries have a lot of safety requirements, which can be enforced by PIM. And then audit is something that more and more organizations are faced with. So it becomes so much simpler if you use a PIM solution. Everything is there. All of the information is in one place. You can have reports, you can have export information. So an audit becomes flawless. So that was what we wanted to cover for this webinar. So with this, I'm going to hand it back to Hannah to see what questions we received from the audience.
Awesome. Yes. And everyone, you can feel free to submit questions here now as well. But let me see what has already been submitted. Just one moment. Okay. First question that we have is, how much time does it take to implement the PIAM solution?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Hannah. PIM has been around for a while. The first PIM solution started about 20 years ago. And for a long time, PIM solutions were known, like the good and the bad, like, yes, it delivers a lot of value, but it's hard to implement. Like, it takes months or years to implement, etc. Those days are gone. Like, PIM solutions today are leveraging what you could call best practices. So they know what works well, and they come with like templated solutions that allow you to really be up and running within a couple of days to weeks. And then, of course, you can still do more fine-grained changes afterwards. But in short, weeks or months is what you're looking at from an implementation timeline perspective.
Awesome. All right, it looks like we have another question here. It says, I'm assuming Right Crowd is cloud-based. What does the subscription model look like? And
Yeah,
there's following questions, but I'll have you go with that first.
yeah, sure. So first of all, for the audience, PIM typically can be sort of consumed in two models. Either you install the software or your provider, PIM provider, installs it in your environment, which can be in your data center, in your private cloud, something like that. Or you can consume this more as a SaaS, whereby the PIM provider operates this in the cloud. Now, from a pricing model perspective, and it's pretty much the same across PIM vendors these days, is the pricing is on the one hand based on the number of identities. And identities, how do you sort of think of that? Think of the sum of your employees and contractors, people that need access to your facilities. What does that total picture look like? So that's one sort of dimension. And the other one is the functionality. PIM is very feature rich. So depending on which feature functionality you want, that'll determine the price point.
Awesome. They also asked a follow-up question with what API requirements are needed for integration to, is it a PAC system or is that an acronym, PAC system?
Yeah, integration with the physical access control system.
There we
So
go.
yeah, the good thing about PIM solutions is that they come with two-way deep integration with physical access control systems out of the box. And yes, we do use, whenever the vendor supports that, we use typically APIs that the physical access providers provide for that. So to give you a couple of examples, if we would integrate with a physical access control system from, let's say, Lenel, which is one of the market leaders in that space, Lenel has a very sort of defined API, in their case called open access. So we will use that API to do that full integration, whether it's to pull some information from the physical access control system, like what are all of the doors, the access levels, etc., or push information into the physical access control system.
Excellent. Okay, let me pull this up again. All right, we have another question. What size of an organization does the PIAM solution make the most sense for?
Yeah. Very good question. And let me start with like two extremes. What if I'm a 100%, 100-person organization, apologies, or versus I'm an organization that has 250,000 employees? You can imagine that the time spent on manual processes for a 100-person organization is way less than for the other one. And that's really how you should look at PIM. The larger the organization, the more employees and contractors you have, the more dynamic, the more buildings you have, the more physical security sort of sensitive places you have, the more safety related requirements you have, the more PIM becomes attractive. So ballpark numbers, typically as of a couple of thousand employees is when it becomes interesting to look at PIM.
Gotcha. Okay, and it's looking like that might be all the open questions that we have for right now. So up to you. You know, we have this full hour if you'd like to wait and see if any more roll through, or if you'd like, we can just give your contact information and we can close out here. I'll leave it up to you, Bart.
Yeah. Well, I propose we close it out here. People can still get in touch with us if they want to, if they have any further questions. But other than that, I hope people have a good idea now of what PIM is all about and why they should consider it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on today's webinar, and thank you, Bart, for sharing all that valuable information. And we'll close out.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.